What if I told you there's a truth about Africa that has been deliberately erased from history books? A profound truth, one so fundamentally powerful it demands a complete reevaluation of everything you thought you knew about ancient civilizations, the very origins of humanity, and those deep mysteries that modern science still desperately struggles to explain. Imagine for a moment that giants truly walked this earth. I am not speaking of flowery metaphors or the charming exaggerations of folklore and myth, but colossal, sentient beings who left behind unmistakable, physical marks, imprints upon the land and in our cultural memory, that you can still observe today if you know where to look. What if these giants weren't merely mythological creatures, but genuine entities imbued with highly advanced knowledge, superhuman physical power, and a direct, palpable connection to what countless traditions call the divine, the angelic, or the celestial sphere? Africa, the recognized cradle of mankind, holds secrets buried beneath its sands and sealed within its oral traditions that would force any conventional scientist to dismantle their most fundamental and cherished theories. We are talking about megalithic structures of staggering scale that openly defy our current understanding of primitive engineering capabilities. We are speaking of fossilized skeletons, recovered in guarded excavations, that simply do not align with the established official narrative of human evolution. We refer to ancient, rarely translated texts that vividly describe direct encounters between early humans and beings of impossible, tremendous stature. Have you ever paused to wonder why certain, potentially game-changing archaeological discoveries simply vanish from the news cycle shortly after being reported? Why are some extraordinary artifacts immediately sequestered, locked away in deep museum basements, never to be displayed or analyzed by the public or independent researchers? Why do so many disparate African cultures, separated by thousands of kilometers of deserts and jungles, and without any historical contact with one another, recount virtually identical foundational stories about giants who literally descended from the heavens? It's no mere coincidence. There is a deeply consistent, unmistakable pattern here that can no longer be ignored or dismissed as simple mythology. The Dogon people of Mali, keepers of astronomical secrets, speak of the Namos, gigantic amphibious beings who arrived from the stars, specifically the Sirius system, bringing with them astronomical knowledge they had absolutely no empirical means of possessing thousands of years ago. The Zulus of South Africa faithfully preserve legends about the Abangoma, the ancestral giants who were said to have instructed humanity in the intricate arts of working with metals and cultivating the land in structured, productive ways. They were the first civilizing force. In Egypt, carefully examined hieroglyphic texts mention the Shemsuhor, the followers of Horus, described explicitly as beings of immense height and intimidating presence who ruled over the Nile Valley long before the first human pharaohs established their dynasties. And in Ethiopia, ancient, fiercely protected manuscripts speak extensively of the Nephilim, those fallen ones, the celestial beings who abandoned their sacred, celestial posts to dwell and hybridize among the daughters of men. Do you perceive the astonishing connection? Each of these cultures, operating in complete isolation from the others, meticulously documents the very same phenomenon, the undeniable presence of giants in ancient Africa. But the crucial question that few dare to ask, and that official history avoids at all costs, is this: were these giants simply a slightly larger, albeit unique, human species? Or are we truly talking about something else entirely? Something that traverses the profound, ancient line between the purely physical and the purely spiritual realms? Something that the Bible, the Quran, the Vedic texts, and countless other sacred scriptures mention with astonishing granular detail. Today, you will discover powerful evidence that has been systematically marginalized and ignored by mainstream academia for decades. You will begin to understand precisely why this volatile information has been suppressed, and how it inextricably links to contemporary global mysteries that official science desperately prefers to leave unanswered. Prepare yourself, because what you are about to discover may fundamentally shake the very foundations of what you currently believe to be true about our deep past, our volatile present, and perhaps even our inevitable future. Before we delve deep into this revealing, paradigm-shifting journey, however, I need you to do something very important right now to help this message reach others. Leave a comment below specifying where you are currently watching this video. Just write the name of your city or country, This immediate action helps me understand the true geographic reach of those genuinely interested in uncovering these hidden, forbidden truths. And look, I know you might be tempted to think about watching this video later or leaving the like until the end. But here is a sincere, urgent request. Hit the subscribe button now and activate that notification bell. Why? Because content like this, which deliberately reveals sensitive information challenging firmly established official narratives, often has its distribution severely limited or outright censored by major digital platforms. If you do not subscribe and activate notifications immediately, you will likely never see the next videos where I will delve even deeper into these escalating revelations. And please leave a like too, because that is the critical signal that tells the algorithm that this content is valuable, trustworthy, and urgently needs to reach more people willing to question the consensus reality. Think about it carefully. How many people do you personally know who are truly willing to question the sanitized history they were spoon-fed in school? How many are truly open to physical, tangible evidence that aggressively contradicts the authorized, official story? Few. Very few indeed. And you who have made it this far into the introduction, have already demonstrated that you are not an ordinary person who passively accepts everything placed before them. You demand real answers. You possess the intellectual curiosity to understand the profound mysteries surrounding our complex existence. And that exactly is why this video exists. In the following sections, you will discover the compelling, physical evidence of the undeniable presence of giants in ancient Africa. You will understand the astonishing connection between these massive beings and the advanced ancient civilizations that constructed impossible, megalithic structures. You will learn about the deep-rooted relationship between giants, gods, and fallen angels, precisely as described in sacred texts spanning various global traditions. And most importantly, you will understand how this crucial information was systematically and deliberately hidden, and the profound why behind that suppression. But for all that to happen, I need your absolute, undivided attention. Turn off all distractions. Focus laser-like on what is coming next, because every single detail matters. Each piece of evidence connects seamlessly to the next, slowly forming a complete, coherent picture that most people will simply never have the opportunity to see. So, is it settled? Are you truly ready to have your worldview expanded in a way you may never have experienced before? Let's start from the beginning, but not the manufactured beginning you were reluctantly taught in school. Forget for a moment that simplified, linear narrative of human evolution, where everything started with basic cells that gradually, miraculously became more complex until we arrived at Homo sapiens. That authorized story is riddled with enormous, inexplicable holes, gaps that even reluctant scientists admit they cannot satisfactorily bridge. In Africa, the widely recognized cradle of humanity, there exists archaeological evidence that simply refuses to conform to this neatly packaged model. I am talking specifically about gigantic, fossilized footprints discovered in South Africa, precisely within the rugged Mpumalanga region. These incredible impressions measure well over a meter in length and are perfectly preserved in granite bedrock that is geologically dated to be millions of years old. How, scientifically, is this possible? Conventional geology and paleontology do not possess a satisfactory answer. Some experts weakly attempt to explain them away as natural geological formations caused by erosion. But when you meticulously analyze the anatomical details of these impressions, the 5 clearly defined toes, the distinctive plantar arch, the weight distribution characteristic of a bipedal humanoid foot, it becomes scientifically impossible to deny that we are facing evidence of something extraordinary and deliberate. And we are not talking about 1 or 2 isolated, anomalous footprints. There are entire trails, sequences that clearly show walking patterns indicating the deliberate, heavy movement of enormous bipedal beings of truly colossal stature. But these footprints are only the dramatic beginning. In various regions across the African continent, archaeologists have also discovered tools and weapons of absurd, impractical dimensions. In Morocco, researchers found immense hand axes weighing more than 20 kilograms, items that would have required literal superhuman strength to wield effectively for daily tasks. In Kenya, recovered spears and arrowheads possess proportions suggesting users who stood at least 4 to 5 meters tall. The official, often repeated explanation? Ceremonial tools. But this justification immediately crumbles when we analyze the significant wear and tear clearly visible on these objects. This wear is unmistakable evidence of practical, heavy-duty, utilitarian use, not ornamental display. Furthermore, why would so many different, unconnected cultures spontaneously produce the same type of giant ceremonial tool without any communication with each other? It makes no logical sense, unless we accept the radical possibility that these tools were actually designed for and wielded by beings of great natural stature. Now, consider the massive megalithic constructions scattered throughout the African continent. The Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt remains an architectural enigma that defies modern engineering analysis. Granite blocks weighing over 70 tons were somehow transported hundreds of kilometers across the desert and erected with a mathematical and astronomical precision that challenges our current best technology. Traditional Egyptologists insist on weak explanations involving simple ramps, hemp ropes, and vast numbers of slave laborers. However, practical experiments and engineering simulations have demonstrated conclusively that these proposed methods simply would not work. The required earthen ramps alone would have needed to be so long and massive that they would have required more material than the pyramid itself. Even today, replicating the mathematical and stellar precision of Giza is an immensely challenging feat. So, how did so-called primitive societies, without computers, advanced measuring equipment, or hydraulic cranes, achieve such an unparalleled feat of construction? The obvious, yet aggressively rejected, answer is that they had assistance. Help from beings possessing knowledge and capabilities far exceeding anything ordinary humans possessed at that time. The ancient Egyptian texts themselves, when translated literally and stripped of the modern filters that attempt to make everything polite and metaphorical, speak clearly of the Netru beings who were neither completely human nor entirely divine, but occupied a powerful middle ground. These Netru are described as having imposing stature, wielding mastery over the very forces of nature, and possessing unnaturally long lifespans. They were the ones who taught the Egyptians astronomy, complex mathematics, medicine, agriculture, and monumental architecture. Isn't it fascinating how perfectly this aligns with the consistent stories from other African cultures about giant, knowledgeable instructors? Further south, in Zimbabwe, we find the profound ruins of Great Zimbabwe, a vast stone city that puzzled European explorers and historians for decades. When it was first discovered, the Europeans simply could not intellectually reconcile the fact that black Africans could have built something so sophisticated and impressive. They hastily concocted absurd theories about Phoenicians, or even survivors from the mythical Atlantis, being the true builders. But the archaeological record is clear. It was built by the ancestors of the Shona people. What they deliberately failed to tell you, however, is that the oral legends of the Shona people speak plainly of assistance from the Mad Zimbabwe, ancestral giants who taught their forefathers the specialized techniques of massive stone construction. These stories are not ambiguous metaphors about important ancestors or powerful human leaders. The descriptions are literal. Beings 3 to 4 times the size of a normal man, possessing strength capable of moving stones that 10 men together could not even budge. And before you think this phenomenon is unique only to southern Africa, let us turn to the other extreme of the continent. In Ethiopia, the sacred texts of the Keber Nagast, the central holy book of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, contain detailed passages about the Nephilim, the giants born from the union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. These canonical texts are not treated as mere allegory by Ethiopian tradition, but as factual, foundational history. They describe how these giants possessed forbidden, highly advanced knowledge that they then shared with humanity. Teachings on metallurgy, cosmetology, astrology, and systematic warfare. Interestingly, Ethiopia is one of the few places in the world with an uninterrupted Christian tradition dating back to the first centuries of the Common Era, thereby preserving texts and interpretations that have been deliberately lost or drastically altered in other parts of the Christian world. They have maintained complete versions of books like the Book of Enoch, while other churches have rejected it as apocryphal. And what exactly does the Book of Enoch reveal about the giants? It provides specific names, genealogies, chilling descriptions of their corrupting activities, and even the dramatic ultimate fate of these beings. It describes 200 watchful angels, *Grigori*, who decided to abandon their celestial duty, descended to Earth on Mount Hermon, and took human wives. From these forbidden unions were born the Nephilim, hybrid creatures of extraordinary strength, stature, and violence. These giants grew predatory, quickly consuming the Earth's resources and eventually beginning to devour humans themselves. Their rampant, pervasive presence corrupted humanity to such an extent that, according to the text, it was the primary catalyst for the Great Flood that only Noah and his family survived. Now, you might be thinking this is simply religious mythology and has no grounding in material reality. But here is the truly fascinating pivot point. African cultures that never had any historical contact with Judaism or Christianity possess virtually identical foundational narratives. The Dogon of Mali, for example, possess an incredibly complex cosmology that features beings called the Namos, giant, aquatic-based creatures said to have arrived from the Sirius star system. The Dogon's precise astronomical knowledge of Sirius is genuinely extraordinary. They knew about Sirius B, a white dwarf companion star orbiting Sirius A, decades before modern astronomers discovered it using powerful, advanced telescopes. How could an isolated tribe in Mali possess this level of astrophysics? Their answer is utterly straightforward. The Namos taught them. These giant, life-giving beings who required water to survive shared complex celestial knowledge with the ancestors of the Dogon people. And here is something that should truly make you stop and rethink the historical framework. When you map out all these stories, all these persistent legends from drastically different regions of Africa, an undeniable, coherent pattern emerges. We are not discussing random, independently evolved myths. There is a surprising, shocking consistency in the fundamental details. Giants who came from above, whether from the literal heavens or from the deep stars. Giants who possessed advanced, revolutionary knowledge that they subsequently shared with humankind. Giants who engaged sexually with human women, generating hybrid, aggressive offspring. And eventually, giants whose catastrophic actions led directly to their own destruction or final banishment. This consistency aggressively crosses cultural, linguistic, and geographical boundaries. How can we possibly explain this without admitting that there might be a massive kernel of tangible, historical truth embedded within these narratives? The discovery I am about to share was deliberately and efficiently kept out of the mainstream media spotlight. In 1937, in a remote, little-explored region of southern Africa, specifically in what is now Namibia, an archaeological expedition led by meticulous German researchers made an extraordinary, world-changing find. They uncovered a pristine cemetery containing several humanoid skeletons of impossible dimensions. The largest specimen meticulously measured approximately 4 meters and 30 centimeters, over 14 feet, from head to toe. The original expedition reports describe skulls with cranial capacity almost double that of a modern human, featuring distinct morphological features including prominent supraorbital ridges, brow bones, robust, large jaws, and significantly oversized molars. The ribs were so thick that a single rib weighed more than the entire set of ribs of a normal human being. The femurs had extraordinary bone density, clearly suggesting the need to support extremely high body weight. Photographs were taken, measurements were meticulously recorded, and critical bone samples were collected for further analysis. And then, something deeply sinister happened. With the outbreak of World War II and the subsequent turbulent geopolitical reconfiguration of the region, all these explosive findings simply vanished. The skeletons that were purportedly being transported to specialized museums in Europe never reached their destination. The original photographs and detailed field notes were confiscated. The dedicated researchers who worked on the expedition were dispersed, and those few who attempted to speak publicly about the discoveries were systematically discredited, ridiculed, or silenced entirely. Only a few fragmented documents and low-quality photographs survived, circulating exclusively in fringe academic and esoteric circles. Why expend so much pervasive effort to erase definitive evidence of something that should, by all rights, revolutionize our fundamental understanding of human history? The answer is unsettling, because this evidence violently challenges fundamental, controlling narratives about who we are, and critically, where we truly came from. But this was not the only discovery of its kind. In 1895, In the Lovelock Cave region of Nevada, USA, skeletons of giant red-haired individuals were found that, according to initial analyses, showed cultural connections with artifacts found in North Africa. The Paiute indigenous tribe of the region held long-standing legends about cannibalistic, towering red-haired giants called Ctcah who terrorized their ancestors. When the cave was fully explored, the skeletons found had exactly the characteristics described in the legends. Heights between 2.4 meters and 3 meters, red hair preserved by the cave's aridity, and clear evidence of cannibalistic practices visible on marked human bones found at the site. Do you see the emerging pattern? Legends, long treated as frivolous fiction, turn out to be based on harsh reality when properly and independently investigated. But returning specifically to Africa, we have the documented case of the air caves in Niger. In 1959, a French expedition discovered extraordinary cave paintings depicting normal human figures standing alongside humanoid figures at least 3 times their height. These paintings are not crude or symbolic. They show realistic anatomical proportions, strongly suggesting that the ancient artists were representing something they actually witnessed. One of the most intriguing scenes shows these giants carrying massive stones, seemingly involved in the construction of what appears to be a megalithic structure. Alongside these paintings, archaeological strata were found containing tools whose dimensions directly correspond to the giant figures depicted. But here is where the story gets even more current and fascinating. Mitochondrial DNA analysis of human remains found at specific archaeological sites in sub-Saharan Africa has revealed ancient haplogroups that simply do not fit into the known human family tree. In 2010, geneticists analyzing DNA extracted from bones recovered in Nigeria identified sequences suggesting a profound mixture with an unknown hominid species, one distinctly different from the already catalogued Neanderthals or Denisovans. This explosive discovery was quietly published in specialized, obscure journals, but never received the massive media attention it undeniably deserved. Why? Because it raises deeply uncomfortable questions about hybridization, about the possibility that our species mixed genetically with something that wasn't recognizably human by official standards. And before you claim I am making forced, circumstantial connections, let me present something even more concrete, publicly available evidence. In the National Museum of Johannesburg, South Africa, there is a large humanoid skull on permanent display that defies all established classification. Officially catalogued as belonging to an individual with pathological gigantism, the skull exhibits characteristics that do not align with this medical explanation. Gigantism, a condition caused by an excess of growth hormone, results in bones that are elongated, but proportionally weak and fragile. This specific skull, however, exhibits extraordinary bone density and robust proportions that clearly suggest an organism perfectly adapted to great stature, not a debilitating pathological anomaly. We live in extremely difficult times in which prophecies are marked, but many still do not realize what is happening in the world. For this, I have made my ebook available to reveal the apocalypse, which you can download immediately through the first set of comments. This book will help you uncover all the mysteries of the apocalypse and transform your life. Go to the first set of comments to get your copy as very little remains and will be removed soon. Don't waste time. Click now and secure your digital copy. The cranial sutures indicate that the individual lived to an advanced age without suffering the debilitating health problems that normally accompany pathological gigantism. Doctors and anthropologists who have examined this specimen were left genuinely perplexed. It does not fit into any known category of Homo sapiens, nor does it correspond to other catalogued hominid species. It is something profoundly different. But perhaps the most disturbing evidence comes not from excavated archaeological findings, but from ancient, sacred texts that have been systematically reinterpreted and neutered to fit modern, secular worldviews. Take the classic Egyptian texts known as the pyramid texts and the coffin texts. When you read conventional academic translations, you find flowery, poetic language about pharaohs ascending to heaven to symbolically join the gods. And don't forget to get your Reveal the Apocalypse ebook. It is very important that you buy it quickly before the copies run out. But when you meticulously examine the literal translations, word for word, without the predetermined interpretive filters, a dramatically different, mechanical story emerges. These texts explicitly describe advanced technologies. They speak of gods traveling in flying celestial boats, of weapons that fire focused beams of light, and of portals between distinct realms of existence. One specific, chilling passage from the pyramid texts describes a pharaoh entering a secluded chamber where the Shemsuhor, the followers of Horus, perform a ritual involving what can only be described as surgical or genetic alteration. The text speaks of deliberately opening the body, removing certain organs, and replacing them with divine versions that allow the pharaoh to transcend ordinary human mortality. This sounds suspiciously like mythologized, fear-filled descriptions of advanced medical procedures or bioengineering. And the Shemsuhor, who were they really? Older Egyptian sources described them not as ordinary humans, but as beings of divine, semi-celestial lineage who ruled Egypt long before the first pharaonic dynasty. They were, according to these very sources, much taller than ordinary humans, possessed extremely long lives verging on immortality, and held knowledge that seemed utterly magical by the standards of the time. Interestingly, Egyptian king lists such as the Abydos king list and the Palermo stone document absurdly long reigns for these pre-dynastic rulers, with some lasting hundreds or even thousands of years. Conventional historians dismiss these astronomical numbers as mythological exaggerations or symbolic counting. But what if they were accurate, sober records of a physical reality we simply do not yet comprehend? What if these Shemsuhor were the very same giants mentioned consistently in other African traditions? Now, let's connect these explosive dots in a way that few scholars have dared to attempt. If we look at a map of Africa and mark every location where there are persistent accounts of giants, whether through hard archaeological findings, deeply ingrained cultural legends, or ancient preserved texts, a clear, compelling geographical pattern emerges. Most of these occurrences and evidence are concentrated along a vertical strip that runs from the north, specifically from the region of Egypt and Ethiopia, down the entire eastern strip through the Great Rift Valley, to finally reach southern Africa. This precise region, particularly the Great Rift Valley, is globally recognized by paleoanthropologists as the cradle of humanity, the very place where our hominid ancestors supposedly evolved and diversified. Isn't it a strange, statistically impossible coincidence that the very region celebrated as the birthplace of humanity is also the region with the highest concentration of evidence and legends about towering giants? Perhaps the real story is far more complex than simple, straight-line evolution. Perhaps there was continuous, profound interaction, interbreeding, genetic transfer, and knowledge exchange between different species or types of conscious beings. The hypothesis I am proposing, and which the accumulating evidence seems powerfully to support, is that different groups fundamentally coexisted in ancient Africa. There were anatomically modern humans like us. There was also a substantial population of giant human beings, possibly a genetically adapted variation, or a related but distinct species. And there were also, according to multiple sacred traditions, beings that were not entirely physical or that originated from outside Earth, referred to consistently as gods, angels, or stellar beings. The interaction between these three disparate groups shaped the development of ancient African civilizations in ways that conventional historiography absolutely refuses to recognize. Consider how suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, civilizations in Africa emerged with advanced knowledge already fully formed. Ancient Egypt did not emerge through the slow, linear process typical of simple tribal societies transitioning into early civilization. Instead, it seems to have materialized almost instantaneously, already complete and fully functional. This is not the pattern of gradual development. We find a society already possessing complex hieroglyphic writing systems, advanced mathematical principles, astonishingly precise astronomy, monumental architecture defying contemporary technology, and a sophisticated, centralized social organization. There is simply no visible period of rudimentary development or awkward trial and error within the standard archaeological record. It is as if an entire, comprehensive instruction manual for an advanced civilization was suddenly and without precedent delivered to the Nile Valley inhabitants. The Egyptians themselves consistently attributed this profound leap in knowledge to the Neteru and the Shu. Why, then, in our modern academic hubris, do we summarily dismiss their own explanations for their origin? Similarly, the enigmatic Nok civilization in what is now Nigeria, flourishing approximately a millennium before the Common Era, produced exquisite terracotta sculptures alongside evidence of complex metallurgical techniques. These ironworking skills, according to the standard evolutionary models of technological development, should not have existed at that time. Theoretical timelines dictate the Nok people should still have been firmly entrenched in the Stone Age. Yet, they were expertly forging iron tools and artifacts. Where did this highly specialized knowledge suddenly originate? Nok legends offer a striking correspondence, speaking plainly of giant ancestors who arrived and taught them the difficult, complex art of smelting and working metal. Once again, we observe a perfect convergence between anomalous archaeological findings, technologies appearing far too early, and powerful oral traditions describing immense, non-human instructors. Moving eastward to the kingdom of Aksum, situated in present-day Ethiopia, we encounter further impossible feats. Enormous monolithic granite obelisks, some weighing hundreds of tons. These structures were quarried, transported, and erected with an astronomical precision that utterly defies conventional explanations using only known ancient techniques. Ethiopian tradition provides its answer. They were the work of the Nephilim, beings who, before they were destroyed or banished from the region, deliberately transmitted sophisticated knowledge to select groups of human beings. And here lies a detail that should truly compel a comprehensive reevaluation of history. The consistent connection between the presence of giants and the introduction of metallurgical knowledge appears universally throughout these traditions. It is a recurring, specific motif. The apocryphal Book of Enoch, a text foundational to many traditions, specifically names the fallen angel Azazel as the entity who first taught humankind the art of making metal weapons and armor. The Dogon people credit the amphibious Namo with providing the secret knowledge of forging. The Zulu speak of the Abangoma, who taught them the transformative secrets of metallurgy. And Egyptian texts, as noted, attribute the introduction of metalwork to the Neteru. This phenomenon is far beyond mere coincidence. Metallurgy is not a simple, accidental discovery. It is a profoundly transformative technology requiring an integrated and sophisticated understanding of deep-level mining, the achievement and control of high temperatures, the precise science of alloys, and the careful processes of tempering and forging. It demands systematic experimentation, a nascent comprehension of chemistry and physics, and, most importantly, the reliable transmission of specialized knowledge across generations. If multiple independent cultures, separated by geography and time, all attribute the arrival of this core technology to giants or non-human entities, perhaps we have an ethical and historical obligation to take these converging claims more seriously than academic dogma permits. But the connection extends well beyond mere technology. There is a profound, interwoven spiritual aspect to these narratives that we cannot afford to ignore. Virtually all African traditions that speak of these giant ancestors also discuss, often explicitly, a vast cosmological conflict. This was not simply a story about large beings dwelling near smaller humans. It was an account of an epical war between different factions of powerful, non-terrestrial entities. On one side stood beings who allegedly wished to uplift humanity, sharing knowledge, promoting development, perhaps seeing us as partners. On the opposing side were entities described as seeking to dominate, exploit, and even hybridize with humans for their own specific, often malign purposes. Ethiopian texts, rich in detail, describe precisely how the watchful angels, who were responsible for begetting the Nephilim, were ultimately punished for their transgression, imprisoned in desolate places of darkness, awaiting a final cosmic judgment. The Book of Enoch meticulously details the intervention. The Archangel Michael and other celestial warriors were dispatched to resolve the crisis, first engaging the giants in destructive battle, and then confining their angelic progenitors. Intriguingly, archaeological excavations conducted in Ethiopian caves have yielded sedimentary layers showing physical evidence of massive burning and catastrophic destruction, dated back approximately 5,000 years. This time frame astonishingly corresponds to the events described in these ancient texts. Is this a coincidence, or is it physical evidence of a genuine, overwhelming conflict? In West Africa, the Yoruba possess an equally complex cosmology involving the Orishas, powerful entities who actively interact with the human world. Some of these Orishas are specifically described as having giant physical forms and were responsible for teaching humans various complex forms of knowledge. Yet, the mythology also recounts tales of other Orishas who were banished or imprisoned for serious transgressions. Exu, for example, is frequently misunderstood and demonized in modern interpretations. But in the authentic older traditions, he represents the dynamic force that challenged the established cosmic order, the one who brought forbidden knowledge, who deliberately crossed boundaries that should not have been breached. Does this sound familiar? It is the exact same pervasive archetype as the fallen angel, the light-bearer who illuminates but also carries the risk of burning, who liberates the mind but also corrupts. These are not isolated, disconnected stories from so-called primitive cultures struggling to explain natural phenomena. They are consistent, highly specific accounts passed down through millennia about actual historical events involving real, potent beings who left undeniable physical and, arguably, genetic marks on early African humanity. And here is the deepest question we must confront today. If all these converging lines of evidence are true, if giants genuinely existed in ancient Africa, if they were indeed hybrids resulting from the mixing of humans with angelic or extraterrestrial entities, and if a devastating cosmological war resulted in their destruction or imprisonment, then what does this fundamental reality mean for us, the inheritors of this planet? It means that humanity is not merely the product of blind, indifferent natural evolution operating solely on this planet. It means that there was definitive external intervention, intentional genetic manipulation, and profound hybridization at our origin. It means that we carry within our very DNA the complex, bifurcated heritage of both terrestrial humans and something else entirely, a lineage that originated from outside the established terrestrial sphere. This implies that the ancient cosmological conflict may not have fully concluded, and that these spiritual, non-human forces continue to operate actively behind the scenes of human history. The crucial question we must confront now is this. If there is so much physical evidence, so many detailed ancient texts, and so many converging oral traditions pointing to the historical reality of giants in Africa, why has this knowledge been so aggressively and systematically suppressed? Why do archaeologists who discover giant skeletons routinely face intense institutional pressure to reclassify these remains as merely large humans, or even discard them entirely? Why do major museums maintain vast artifacts in their basements that directly contradict the prevailing official narratives of human history? The answer involves multiple, interlocking layers of self-interest, ranging from religious control to scientific hegemony and racial bias. Let us begin with the religious aspect. During the colonial periods, European Christian missionaries arrived in Africa with a clear, uncompromising agenda: convert the native populations to Christianity and completely eradicate their traditional beliefs, which were universally categorized as pagan or demonic. When these missionaries heard detailed African stories about giants, gods, and celestial beings descending to earth, they recognized disturbing parallels with biblical narratives. Parallels the church had spent centuries metaphorically reinterpreting and minimizing. The Bible is explicit. It repeatedly mentions the Nephilim, the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Emim, and various other giant peoples. Numbers 13:32 and 33 describe Israelite spies returning from Canaan, reporting in terror, "We saw giants there, the sons of Anak, descendants of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight." Deuteronomy 3 verse 1 mentions Og, the king of Bashan, whose iron sarcophagus was approximately 4 meters long. 1 Samuel 17 describes Goliath as standing 6 cubits and a span tall, translating to roughly 290 meters. Most crucially, Genesis 6 verses 1 to 4 unequivocally speaks of the sons of God taking the daughters of men and thereby begetting the Nephilim, the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. During the theological consolidation of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, Christian theologians found these passages deeply troublesome and began a campaign of reinterpretation. The sons of God were redefined, conveniently, not as literal angels but as the descendants of Seth, the righteous son of Adam. The giants, likewise, were explained away as merely powerful or tyrannically evil men, their exceptional stature minimized or disregarded. This extensive reinterpretation was deemed absolutely necessary because accepting the literal reading created complicated, existential theological problems. If angels could literally procreate with humans, it strongly implied that angels possessed physical bodies and sexuality, thereby complicating the established doctrine concerning the non-corporeal nature of angelic beings. Even more problematic, it suggested that humans could possess a partly angelic ancestry, which completely undermined the entire theology of salvation, which is predicated upon the idea of humanity being purely fallen and requiring Christ's sacrifice to save the lineage of Adam. When missionaries arrived in Africa and discovered Africans recounting these same stories, and often maintaining the literal interpretation, it posed a direct, catastrophic threat to centuries of carefully constructed theological work. If Africans, with zero prior exposure to Christianity, possessed independent traditions confirming the literal reading of Genesis 6, then perhaps the painstakingly developed metaphorical reinterpretation was fundamentally wrong. This threat could not be tolerated. Consequently, the African stories were swiftly classified as primitive superstition and demonic falsehoods. The legends were discredited, and any corresponding physical evidence was either actively suppressed or aggressively reinterpreted to fit the preferred, sanitized narrative. Yet, it was not only the Church that had profound reasons to suppress this information. The scientific establishment, particularly after the ascendancy of Darwinian theory, also had much to lose. The theory of evolution by natural selection became the paramount paradigm for explaining biological diversity and human origins. This paradigm functions optimally when the history of life is presented as an orderly, strictly gradual, and predictable progression. Human giants, especially if they are proven to be hybrids resulting from deliberate genetic manipulation by non-human intelligences, simply do not fit this uniform model. They scream of external intervention, catastrophic events, and intelligent genetic engineering. This fundamentally challenges the very methodological naturalism that underpins modern science, the premise that all phenomena must have natural, not supernatural, causes. Furthermore, there was the corrosive issue of racial supremacy and colonialism. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, pseudoscientific theories about racial hierarchies were heavily deployed to justify the economic and military subjugation of African and other non-European peoples. Africans were deliberately portrayed as primitive, less evolved, and closer to animals than to civilized Europeans. Discovering that ancient African civilizations possessed advanced astronomical or technological knowledge, that they built massive megalithic structures, and that they maintained sophisticated oral traditions preserving real historical events. All of this contradicted the foundational narrative of African inferiority. Thus, these inconvenient discoveries were aggressively downplayed, often attributed to fanciful external influences like Phoenicians or imaginary Atlanteans. Anything but admitting that Africans were technologically and culturally advanced in their own right. Some colonial-era archaeologists literally destroyed evidence that challenged their racial expectations. Giant skeletons were dismembered and discarded as mere pathological anomalies. Sophisticated artifacts were miscatalogued or simply vanished in transit to European metropolitan museums. There is extensive documentation of explorers sending crates filled with extraordinary, contradictory artifacts that never reached their intended destinations, officially lost in shipwrecks or stolen, but far more likely confiscated and hidden by authorities who did not want specific, disruptive knowledge to become public. But there is still another level of suppression, one rarely discussed: the occult. Western secret societies and esoteric orders have always maintained an intense, proprietary interest in occult knowledge, particularly information pertaining to fallen angels, magic, alchemy, and the manipulation of spiritual forces. These powerful organizations, which historically included influential members of the European aristocracy, the financial world, and political power structures, had access to information that the general public was never allowed to see. They knew about the giants, the fallen angels, and the possibility of ancient technologies, and they sought to keep this knowledge strictly to themselves, believing it conferred unique power and immense advantage. Some archaeological expeditions in the 19th and early 20th centuries were secretly financed by these societies, not for legitimate academic interest, but explicitly to recover artifacts and knowledge that could be deployed in their occult rituals and practices. When they found something particularly significant, say a technology described in Enochian texts or a physically intact giant skeleton, they did not publish it. They did not share it with the scientific world. They kept it locked away in private collections or in the sealed archives of their lodges and temples. We thus have a devastating convergence of interests working tirelessly to suppress the truth about African giants. religious authorities determined to protect theological orthodoxy, scientists seeking to defend established, comfortable paradigms, racists intent on maintaining narratives of superiority, and occultists dedicated to monopolizing powerful, esoteric knowledge. Against this formidable, multi-layered coalition, evidence was systematically erased, honest researchers were discredited, and public knowledge was aggressively shaped to exclude these inconvenient realities. But what if I were to tell you that some of these secret societies not only knew about the giants but possibly maintained active contact with the descendants or remnants of these lineages? I understand that this sounds like an exaggerated conspiracy theory, but allow me to present information that forces reconsideration. Several established Western esoteric traditions, ranging from high-level Freemasonry to Rosicrucianism, from the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn to even more obscure fraternities, base their core teachings on knowledge that allegedly originated from ancient civilizations, notably ancient Egypt. They speak constantly of ascended masters or great hierophants, beings of superior wisdom who transmitted secrets across the ages. Who, precisely, were these beings? When one delves into the inner texts of these orders, material entirely unavailable to initiates of lower degrees, one finds explicit references to the Nephilim, the Watchers, and the giants as the original possessors of this powerful knowledge, which was partially preserved through secret lineages. The claim is that not all the giants perished in the cataclysms described in the ancient texts. Some survived. Others left behind descendants who, while perhaps not maintaining the extreme stature of their ancestors, carried significant genetic aspects that conferred certain extraordinary abilities. These lineages, they posit, would have slowly mixed with ordinary humans over millennia, diluting the extreme physical traits but preserving elements of superior abilities within specific families. Secret societies supposedly identify and actively recruit individuals from these very lineages, then cultivating their inherited potential. Now, you might dismiss this as sheer fantasy, but consider this: why are so many elite societies absolutely obsessed with genealogy, bloodlines, and family trees? Why did European royal families practice such extreme consanguineous marriages, often resulting in serious genetic problems like hemophilia? Officially, this was to maintain the purity of noble blood and to concentrate political power. But some esoteric traditions propose an additional, hidden motive: to preserve specific genetic characteristics inherited from ancestors who were not entirely human. The very concept of blue blood, the idea that certain noble families are fundamentally, biologically different from commoners. Where does this truly originate? The common explanation is trivial. Wealthy people who avoided sun exposure had such fair skin that their blue veins were highly visible. But this explanation seems superficial and inadequate for such a pervasive, ancient concept. Esoteric texts suggest that blue blood literally refers to biological differences in certain bloodlines, specifically variations related to non-human ancestry. This seems absurd until one considers that scientists have, in fact, identified unusual variations in hemoglobin structure in some isolated human populations, variations that do not perfectly align with standard human physiology. Returning specifically to Africa, there is a distinct reason why so many Western esoteric traditions consider Egypt the preeminent source of occult knowledge. It is not merely because Egypt possesses impressive pyramids and mysterious hieroglyphs. It is because the highest initiates of these orders genuinely believe that in ancient Egypt there was direct, continuous contact with the Neteru, with beings who possessed forbidden knowledge, the foundation of Hermetic practices, alchemy, ceremonial magic. All of this is attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a legendary figure the Greeks identified with the Egyptian god Thoth. And who was Thoth according to the Egyptians themselves? One of the Neteru, described as extremely tall with an elongated head, possessing complete knowledge of the fundamental laws of the universe, and capable of transcending death and achieving rebirth. Hermetic texts describe Thoth personally teaching humans the arts of writing, mathematics, astronomy, magic, and alchemy, exactly the same body of forbidden knowledge that texts like the Book of Enoch attribute directly to the fallen angels. Some secret societies claim to possess texts and artifacts that derive directly from these ancient sources, transmitted through secret initiatory chains spanning millennia. They claim to possess knowledge that would allow them to reawaken latent abilities in humans with the correct genetic background, abilities inherited from their giant or angelic ancestors. These abilities include extended longevity, superhuman strength, extrasensory perceptions, and even the manipulation of subtle forces of nature that modern science dismisses as impossible. This would logically explain why these societies operate in such secrecy, why their most important rituals are closed even to the majority of their membership, and why there is such rigid hierarchy and compartmentalization of knowledge. This is not arbitrary elitism. It is because they allegedly work with dangerous, transformative knowledge and practices inherited from beings that most religions consider demonic or fallen. If some factions of these powerful societies truly possess such knowledge, then they have every conceivable interest in keeping the public entirely ignorant about the historical reality of giants and fallen angels. Public acknowledgement of this history would inevitably lead to questions about what else survived, about who possesses this knowledge today, and about what ultimate agendas are being pursued in secret. But the suppression of knowledge about African giants is not merely historical. It actively continues today. When a giant skeleton was accidentally unearthed in South Africa by construction workers in 2004, authorities swiftly confiscated the remains and immediately declared the site a restricted archaeological zone. Independent researchers who attempted access were blocked and threatened. No official scientific report was ever published. The only available information comes from local eyewitnesses and a few poor-quality photographs taken moments before the confiscation. Similarly, in 2012, amateur video footage showing what appeared to be giant bones being excavated in northern Ethiopia briefly circulated online before being scrubbed from the internet under the dubious claim of copyright infringement. Ethiopian authorities never commented on the incident. There is a clear, institutionalized pattern. Discoveries that fundamentally challenge established historical narratives are systematically suppressed. And we are not just talking about national governments. Major scientific institutions, international museums, and academic organizations actively participate in this concealment process. Why? Because acknowledging the historical reality of giants forces a complete and total reassessment of our fundamental understanding of history, evolution, religion, and the very nature of humanity. And those who control knowledge ultimately control power. But now let us explore an even deeper dimension of this question. The intrinsic connection between African giants and the spiritual, the metaphysical, the transcendent. We are not merely talking about an extinct species of unusually large humans. We are talking about beings that multiple, independent traditions describe as a functional bridge between the physical and the spiritual, between the earthly and the celestial realms. When you carefully examine the descriptions of giants in various African traditions, you realize they are rarely portrayed as simply large and strong humans. There is invariably a supernatural, technological, or extra-dimensional dimension to their characteristics. The Namo of the Dogon, for example, were not only physically large and amphibious. They possessed astronomical knowledge that entirely transcended the normal human capabilities of the time. How did they know about Sirius B, a companion star invisible to the naked eye without powerful telescopes? How did they know its 50-year orbital period? How did they know it orbited Sirius A? The Dogon maintained that the Namo came from the stars, that they were amphibious beings who required water but could communicate sophisticated cosmic knowledge to humans because it was part of their fundamental purpose. Similarly, the Egyptian Neteru were not merely physically imposing rulers. Texts describe their abilities as including control over natural elements, the ability to appear and disappear at will, lifespans spanning centuries or millennia, and a profound, operational knowledge of natural laws that allowed them to perform what would seem like magic to ordinary observers. Thoth, specifically, is credited with knowledge of frequency manipulation, of the mathematical relationships governing physical reality, and of portals between dimensions or realms of existence. This cannot be dismissed as mere mythology. When one examines Egyptian sacred architecture, the precise proportions of the pyramids, the angles of the temples, the mathematical relationships encoded in the hieroglyphs, one finds an extraordinary, complex knowledge about sacred geometry, about how specific ratios and proportions affect human consciousness, and about how structures built in certain ways can function as amplifiers of subtle energies. Where did this knowledge come from? The Egyptian answer is unequivocal. From the Neteru. Ethiopian texts push this concept even further, explicitly describing how the Watchers, the angels who begot the Nephilim, taught humans not only practical physical technologies but also intricate spiritual practices, magic, the invocation of entities, and the manipulation of invisible forces. The Book of Enoch provides a precise list of what each of the Watchers' leaders taught. Azazel taught the making of weapons and cosmetics. Amazarek taught enchantments and the properties of roots. Armoros taught the solutions to spells. Barakiel taught astrology. Kokabeel taught astronomy. Ezekiel taught knowledge of the clouds. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. Sariel taught the course of the moon. Notice that this is not just mundane, practical knowledge. It is knowledge about invisible realities, about subtle, governing forces, about manipulating aspects of nature that modern science casually labels as esoteric or pseudoscientific. But what if they are not pseudoscientific? What if they are real, fundamental aspects of nature that we, in our current scientific phase, simply do not yet fully understand? Quantum physics has already demonstrated that physical reality is far stranger than common intuition suggests. Particles can exist in multiple places simultaneously, can be instantly affected by observation, and can be entangled across vast distances where information travels instantaneously, defying the speed of light. If the very physical basis of reality is so bizarre, why is it considered absurd that there are even more exotic aspects that ancient civilizations knew and utilized but that we have since lost? And here is a truly fascinating hypothesis. Several African traditions describe giants not solely as physical beings, but as integrated hybrids that could operate on multiple levels of reality simultaneously. They possessed physical bodies but could also manifest spiritually. They inhabited the earth but maintained an active, conscious connection with celestial or stellar realms. They were mortal in the sense that they could eventually die or be destroyed, but they enjoyed longevity that vastly exceeded that of terrestrial humans. This profound concept suggests that we are dealing with a form of existence fundamentally different from purely physical or purely spiritual, something intermediary. And this has enormous implications for our most fundamental spiritual and philosophical questions. If such beings genuinely existed, then the line separating the physical and the spiritual is not nearly as clear or distinct as we typically assume. If humans could procreate with angels or extraterrestrial entities, producing viable, functional offspring, then there is a fundamental compatibility at some level between these diverse forms of existence. This strongly suggests that consciousness, the soul, the spirit, whatever terminology you choose, is not merely an epiphenomenon of the physical brain, but is something that can exist independently and connect with radically different types of physical vehicles. Several African spiritual traditions have always maintained this more fluid, dynamic view of the relationship between the physical and the spiritual. In Yoruba cosmology, for example, each person has multiple aspects of self. Ar, the physical body, Emi, the life force, Ori, individual consciousness, and also connections with specific orishas. It is not a simple division between body and soul, but a complex understanding of multiple layers of existence operating simultaneously, each influencing the others. Similarly, in ancient Egypt, a person consisted of Khat, the physical body, Ka, the spiritual double and vital essence, Ba, the mobile personality and soul, Ak, the enlightened self which transcended death, and several other subtle aspects forming a complete cosmological unit. And the Neteru, the supreme beings, were superior and had absolute dominion over all these interconnected dimensions of existence, being able to consciously manipulate them and traverse them in ways that ordinary, uninitiated humans could not conceive. This leads us to a profound and unsettling question. If giants were hybrids created through the union of human lineages with angelic or extraterrestrial beings, if they possessed genetic capabilities that transcended normal human limitations, such as immense strength, longevity, and acute mental powers, then what happened to these extraordinary capabilities? Were they completely lost, utterly erased from the blueprint when the giants were destroyed and wiped from historical memory? Or do they remain latent, a kind of dormant superhuman coding, lying hidden in the human genetic heritage, especially in the direct descendants of these specific lineages? Some esoteric traditions suggest a truly radical idea, that all humans carry some degree of this ancient heritage, that we are all, in some complex or distant way, descended from those ancient unions of the celestial and the terrestrial, and that therefore we all possess the potential for capabilities far beyond what we currently manifest in our constrained modern lives. The critical difference lies not in having the potential, but in its activation, in its awakening, in the receipt of the appropriate initiatory technology or spiritual transmission that unlocks these dormant, godlike potentials within the psyche and the physical structure. This heritage explains why so many African and other ancient spiritual traditions place such immense emphasis on initiation, on rigorous rites of passage, on intensive transformative processes that are believed to fundamentally and irreversibly change the initiate at a cellular and spiritual level. It is not merely symbolic, psychological, or performative theater. These practices may actually be precise technologies designed to activate dormant genetic or epigenetic aspects, accessing inheritances from ancestors who were not entirely or purely human. And if this startling premise is true, then the ancient cosmological conflict between different factions of powerful, non-human beings, the divine war recorded in myth, is not merely over. It continues right now, relentlessly at the human level, with different groups working tirelessly to activate, control, or aggressively suppress these latent capabilities within the human population. Some forces dearly want humanity to awaken to its full, magnificent potential. Others, however, want desperately to keep humanity dormant, docile, controllable, and forever separated from its true power and divine heritage. So, how does all this ancient drama apply to your life today, right now, as you listen to these words? Why should you expend mental energy caring about giants that supposedly existed thousands of years ago, about fallen angels or advanced extraterrestrials, about suppressed ancient knowledge that seems irrelevant to your daily routine? The answer is intensely personal. These aren't just dusty stories about the distant past. They are fundamentally about your identity, about your potential, and about the stakes in the existential conflict between truth versus manipulation. If the story you've been taught about who you are, where humanity truly comes from, and what your actual place is in the vast cosmos is fundamentally wrong, deliberately misleading, or grievously incomplete, then all your core assumptions about what's possible for you, about your limits, and ultimately about your life's true purpose are also inherently flawed or wrong. Recognizing that highly advanced giants existed in ancient Africa, that there was confirmed interaction between early humans and intelligent non-human beings, and that advanced cosmological knowledge existed in ancient civilizations only to be later lost, corrupted, or systematically suppressed, this recognition changes everything about your worldview. It means you live in a world far more mysterious, far more dangerous, and far more full of unrealized possibilities than the simplified mainstream narrative suggests. It means that the self-proclaimed authorities who claim to know definitively how everything works may be not just genuinely mistaken, but perhaps even deliberately lying to maintain control. It means you need to question more, investigate the primary evidence for yourself, and trust less in the academic and institutional experts who often have their own complex, hidden agendas. But there's also a direct and urgent spiritual application. If you carry the genetic heritage of beings who possessed extraordinary non-physical abilities, then those abilities are not mythological. They lie dormant within you right now. I'm not talking about suddenly becoming physically gigantic, obviously, but about activating the far more valuable non-physical aspects of that heritage. This includes expanded consciousness, perceptions that extend far beyond the 5 normal physical senses, the ability to access complex information directly without conventional learning, gnosis, increased longevity and resistance to disease, and truly superhuman focus and willpower. Traditional African spiritual practices often focused precisely on developing these activations. Initiations into powerful societies like the Yoruba, Egyptian, Dogon, and other secret traditions are not merely symbolic rituals passed down through time. They are refined, complex processes designed to forcibly awaken dormant abilities, to connect the initiate with powerful forces and entities that exist beyond the ordinary physical realm, and critically, to transmit esoteric knowledge that cannot be learned intellectually or stored in a library, but must be experienced and absorbed directly into the consciousness. Of course, there are profound dangers here as well. If the ancient texts are correct that some of the powerful beings who interacted with ancient humans were rebels, fallen beings pursuing selfish agendas that do not necessarily benefit humanity in the long term or seek to control it, then simply seeking contact with these potent, non-human forces without proper spiritual discernment and preparation can be extremely dangerous, risking psychic invasion or manipulation. There's a critical reason why almost all genuine spiritual traditions emphasize rigorous purification, uncompromising moral preparation, and deep mentorship from experienced, proven initiates before anyone is allowed to move on to the more powerful, potentially destabilizing practices. It's not arbitrary elitism or hoarding of secrets. It is essential protection against forces that can swiftly overwhelm or utterly consume those who are spiritually and mentally unprepared. But for most people, the most practical, immediate application is simply this. Live your life knowing with certainty that reality is infinitely greater and stranger than what you've been casually told. Do not passively accept official narratives handed down about history, science, religion, or any other area that defines your world. Investigate relentlessly, question everything, seek out primary, unedited sources. Look actively for evidence that doesn't neatly fit into the dominant, safe theories. Talk to people from different cultures who maintain ancient, sacred oral traditions that predate written history. Read ancient texts in literal translations, not the sanitized or politically corrected versions approved by modern institutions. And most importantly, pay razor-sharp attention to your own direct, unmediated experience. Have you ever had sudden, profound moments of knowing, moments of gnosis, that you can't rationally explain how you acquired? Have you ever clearly felt presences you can't physically see? Have you ever had dreams that seemed more vivid, more meaningful, or more terrifyingly real than waking life itself? Have you ever experienced profound synchronicities or patterns that are statistically impossible to be mere coincidence? Have you ever felt a deep, inexplicable connection to places you've never visited or cultures that aren't part of your formal upbringing? These experiences, far from being signs of imagination or mental instability, may be inherited aspects of yourself from those not fully human ancestors trying desperately to manifest. They could be your deeper consciousness touching levels of reality that are normally blocked and suppressed by the restrictive education and social conditioning you received. Instead of dismissing these powerful, unexplained experiences as mere imagination, error, or madness, consider the revolutionary idea that they may be authentic glimpses of real capabilities you possess but have simply never been taught to recognize or develop. Practically, this means cultivating a deep, sustained openness to mystery and ambiguity. It means setting aside intentional time daily for contemplative practices, for meditation, for profound silence, for unstructured connection with the deep forces of nature. Anything that allows the deeper, suppressed aspects of your consciousness to emerge and speak. It means studying ancient spiritual traditions with profound respect, recognizing that they may contain real, operational knowledge preserved through millennia, not just primitive superstitions. It means having the moral courage to be fundamentally different, to question authority publicly, and to seek truth even when it is radically uncomfortable or deeply unpopular. And it means recognizing with awe that you are part of a story infinitely larger than your individual short life. You carry the complex heritage of countless generations, and if these ancient traditions are even partially correct, this heritage includes direct, physical interactions with extraordinary, superhuman beings who fundamentally shaped the course of human civilization. You are a direct participant in a cosmological drama that began before recorded history and continues to unfold in the present day. And your choice about how to live, what knowledge to seek, and what fundamental truths to believe in, that is not trivial. It is an essential part of this ongoing drama. Every single person who awakens to these deeper realities, who questions the carefully constructed official narratives, who seeks direct, experiential knowledge instead of passively accepting what authorities dictate, represents a small but profound victory for the forces that want humanity to awaken to its full, powerful potential. And conversely, every person who remains willfully asleep, accepting without questioning, living only on the shallow surface without ever exploring the spiritual depths, represents a victory for those forces that prefer a controllable, predictable, and ultimately powerless humanity. So the most important application of this hidden knowledge about ancient African giants is this core command. Wake up. Question absolutely everything. Seek absolute truth for yourself, and live every day knowing with certainty that you are infinitely much more than you've ever been told you are. We've now reached a critical point where we need to integrate everything we've discussed and engage in some deep, rigorous self-reflection. You've watched this far, which is powerful evidence that something deep within you instinctively recognizes the importance of this information. Even if a cynical part of your mind still resists, still wants to dismiss it all as fantasy, pseudoscience, or mere conspiracy theory, this tension you may be feeling is completely natural. We are challenging decades of deeply ingrained conditioning narratives that have been reinforced and policed by all the institutions you've been taught to trust: schools, elite universities, museums, mass media, and even religious organizations. But let me ask you some difficult questions you need to answer honestly, solely for yourself. First, why exactly do you believe what you currently believe about human history, about evolution, about the origins of ancient civilizations? Is it because you yourself rigorously examined the primary evidence, visited archaeological sites, read the ancient texts in original languages, or conducted original experiments? Or is it because institutional authorities simply told you that this is the scientific consensus, and you accepted it based on the trust that these authorities are objective and impartial arbiters of reality? If it's the latter, have you truly critically analyzed whether these authorities deserve such blind, unquestioning trust? Look deeply at the history of science itself. How many times has the scientific consensus been demonstrably, catastrophically wrong? The Earth was universally thought to be the flat center of the universe until it wasn't. Washing hands between surgical procedures was considered ridiculous and unnecessary by doctors until Ignaz Semmelweis demonstrated a radical reduction in infections, and was promptly ridiculed to death for it. Stomach ulcers were thought to be caused only by stress until we discovered the Helicobacter pylori bacteria. Neurons were believed not to regenerate in the adult brain until we discovered neurogenesis. The list of established errors goes on indefinitely. Scientific consensus is not the absolute, immutable truth. It is simply the best current understanding based on currently accepted evidence, and both the evidence and the interpretive frameworks used to analyze it are constantly changing. So why assume that the current consensus on giants, on fallen angels, on the intervention of non-human intelligences in human history, is somehow definitive and cannot possibly be wrong? Second question, do you recognize the clear, recurring pattern of suppression? When inconvenient evidence is systematically discarded or hidden. When discoveries that fundamentally contradict official narratives mysteriously disappear from museums or archives. When highly credible researchers who dare to question orthodoxy are instantly ridiculed, professionally discredited, and isolated, doesn't that raise monumental red flags for you? Doesn't it suggest powerfully that perhaps something critically important is being actively protected? Some deep truth that someone in power absolutely does not want to become public knowledge and disrupt the status quo. Think about how many times throughout recorded history vital knowledge has been suppressed by those in control. The Catholic Church rigorously forbade the translation of the Bible into vernacular languages precisely because it didn't want ordinary people reading it, thinking for themselves, and forming their own interpretations that might challenge clerical authority. Governments classify documents and keep crucial secrets for decades, sometimes centuries. Corporations hide research that demonstrates the profound harm caused by their profitable products. This is the very nature of power. It controls information because information is the ultimate power. Why would this dynamic be any different with information about human origins, about interactions with vastly intelligent non-human species, or about latent human supercapabilities? If this information is true, it is literally the most powerful knowledge possible because it fundamentally changes how humans see themselves, what they believe their potential to be, and what limits they accept. Of course, it would be aggressively suppressed and hidden by those who benefit most from ignorant, distracted, and easily controllable populations. Third question, what do you realistically gain by passively accepting the mainstream narrative versus what do you gain by rigorously investigating these alternative, forbidden possibilities? If you accept the conventional, sanitized story, you certainly gain social conformity, acceptance by established institutions, and a comforting sense of being with the majority. But do you gain fundamental truth? Do you gain a truly deeper understanding of yourself and the cosmos? Do you gain direct access to the latent potentials that could radically transform your life and perspective? Probably not. On the other hand, if you investigate the evidence for giants, for the intervention of non-human beings, for the systematic suppression of knowledge, and do so with a genuine, open mind, you risk being labeled eccentric, gullible, or a conspiracy theorist. But you gain the immense possibility of discovering profound, game-changing truths. You gain the incomparable mental freedom of not being bound by externally imposed dogmas. You gain the precious ability to think independently, critically, and creatively. What is the greater long-term risk? Being temporarily ridiculed for questioning, or living an entire life believing in fundamental lies that cap your potential? Fourth question, and perhaps the most important, do you feel at some deep, primal level below rational thought that there is simply something more? That reality is stranger, more interconnected, and more wonderfully complex than what you have been officially told? That you yourself have innate abilities and spiritual connections that go far beyond what you have been taught is conventionally possible? If so, why would you casually discard this visceral feeling? Our modern culture grossly overvalues cold reason and rigid logic, which certainly have their place, but it violently undervalues intuition, visceral feeling, and direct, non-linear knowledge that bypasses the slow, formal mental processes. But what if these non-rational ways of knowing are exactly how your inherited aspect from not entirely human ancestors communicates with your waking mind? What if when you feel something profoundly, deeply in your core, even without being able to explain it logically, that's your deepest self, your self connected to broader, non-local levels of reality, trying desperately to guide you? African spiritual traditions have always honored these deeper modes of knowledge. Divination with cowrie shells or sacred bones is not superstition. It's a highly sophisticated, time-tested method of accessing information through unconventional, transpersonal channels. Possession by the Orishas is not hysteria. It's a deliberate, controlled allowance for deeper aspects of consciousness, or even external, powerful entities, to manifest through the prepared physical body for a purpose. Dreams are not just random processing of memories. They are often portals to other, non-physical levels of reality. Modern Western culture has aggressively cut humans off from these forms of knowledge, insisting that only empirical data validated by the narrow scientific method is real or worthy of attention. But this is an impoverishment, a spiritual mutilation of complete human capabilities. And curiously, this radical limitation profoundly benefits control systems, because people who rely only on external authorities for knowledge are far easier to control than people who also rely on direct, internal, non-local knowledge. So reflect honestly. Are you living your life to the absolute fullest, utilizing all your innate, inherited capabilities? Or are you operating at a mere fraction of your potential because you've been tragically convinced that the rest isn't real or must be dismissed? This knowledge about ancient African giants isn't just interesting history or academic trivia. It is a fundamental key to your own personal awakening. It is an urgent invitation to question, to explore, and to reclaim aspects of yourself that have been suppressed and stolen. And yes, that can be terrifying. Questioning everything you've ever been taught, considering the serious possibility that authorities lied or were simply wrong, facing the reality of non-physical dimensions that you can't easily control or fully understand, that is intensely uncomfortable and destabilizing. It is always easier to remain in the comfort zone of conventional, accepted knowledge, even if that knowledge is severely incomplete or fundamentally false. But real growth always requires stepping boldly outside your self-imposed comfort zone. It always requires confronting uncertainty, ambiguity, and even fear head-on. The question now is, do you possess the necessary courage? Courage to question, courage to seek the inconvenient truth, courage to accept truths that can change everything about how you view existence. Because if you commit to that, if you truly investigate with an open, inquiring mind, you may discover that you are part of a story infinitely larger and more wonderfully complex than you ever dared to imagine. And now we've reached the end of this journey we've taken together. But in truth, this is only the beginning of your own personal, unfolding exploration of these profound truths. You've stayed with me throughout this entire presentation, which already demonstrates unequivocally that you're not an ordinary person who passively accepts superficial narratives without question. You are someone who actively seeks ultimate truth, who yearns to understand the deepest mysteries of existence, and who recognizes that there is infinitely much more between heaven and earth than our limited modern philosophy dares to dream. Briefly recapping the revolutionary things we have discovered. Solid physical evidence of giants in Africa exists, but it has been systematically suppressed and concealed. Multiple African cultures preserve consistent, sacred oral traditions about giant beings who directly interacted with ancient humans, often teaching them advanced knowledge. Sacred texts from various global traditions, including the apocryphal Book of Enoch, specialized Egyptian texts, and powerful legends from peoples such as the Dogon and Zulu, vividly describe fallen angels or celestial beings who united with humans, generating hybrid offspring of immense stature and extraordinary abilities, the Nephilim. These profound stories are not disconnected mythology or isolated fairy tales, but correspond directly to archaeological findings when these findings are not actively hidden or suspiciously reinterpreted. There is overwhelming evidence of deliberate, coordinated suppression of this information by multiple groups with vested interests in maintaining the current official narratives. This includes religious authorities protecting orthodoxy, scientists protecting established paradigms, racists maintaining false narratives of African inferiority, and secret societies monopolizing powerful, transformative knowledge. These suppressed truths have massive, urgent spiritual implications. If giants were hybrids of human and angelic beings, then every human being carries a genetic heritage that includes capabilities far beyond the purely physical and material world. Activating these latent, superhuman capabilities may well be the true, hidden purpose of initiatory African spiritual traditions. And finally, the most critical practical application is to live your life with expanded awareness, to constantly question authorities, to seek truth directly through experience, and to fundamentally recognize and reclaim your full, unbounded potential. So, what specific action do you take now with this life-altering information? First, and this is monumentally important, if you've stayed until this final moment, you need to subscribe to this channel immediately. Why? Because thought-provoking content like this that fundamentally challenges official narratives and reveals hidden truths usually has its distribution severely limited or even blocked by the algorithm systems. If you want to continue having access to this type of critical information that promotes consciousness, you need to subscribe and activate all notifications. Otherwise, you will probably never see videos from this channel in your recommendations again. This is not an exaggeration or hype. It's simply how the platform's control mechanism works. Controversial content, even when verifiable and factual, is aggressively suppressed. Second, leave a detailed comment right now saying which specific part of this video impacted you the most deeply. Was it the discovery of the immense fossilized footprints in South Africa? Was it finally understanding the profound connection between different African traditions about giants? Was it the shocking realization of how knowledge is systematically and globally suppressed? Or was it the spiritual implication that you personally carry the genetic heritage of extraordinary, non-human beings? Write in the comments what was the most revealing, most paradigm-shifting moment for you. This helps the channel, but more importantly, it helps you process and integrate the information into your consciousness. Third, and this is crucial support, leave your like on this video immediately. Now, this is a very long video that required intensive research, translation, and production work. Show the algorithm that this content is valuable, rare, and urgently needs to reach more people who are ready for the truth. Every person who awakens to these truths is important for global consciousness. Every consciousness that expands helps the collective evolution of humanity. Your like contributes directly to this mission. And finally, a suggestion for another related video should now appear on the screen. Click on it and decisively continue your journey of discovery. This next video will explore more deeply specific aspects of what we've discussed here. Whether it's about hidden sacred texts, authentic African spiritual practices, suppressed archaeological evidence, or practical instructions on how to apply this knowledge to fundamentally transform your own life. Don't stop here. Keep investigating, keep questioning, keep seeking truth relentlessly. And remember, you are not alone on this crucial journey. There are millions of people around the world who are awakening to these deeper realities, who are questioning official narratives, and who are reclaiming their full, inherited power and potential. You are part of a global, unstoppable awakening that is happening right now, despite all efforts at suppression. The truth about African giants, about fallen angels, about interventions of non-human intelligences in human history. All of this was hidden for millennia but is now being revealed, and you are now part of those who know the secret. You can no longer live in comfortable, convenient ignorance. You have seen too much, learned too much, questioned too much, and that is a beautiful, powerful thing. It is uncomfortable, yes, but it is real growth. It is the evolution of your consciousness. It is the fulfillment of your potential as a complete human being, not as the diminished, controlled version that the systems of control desperately want you to be. So I am deeply grateful for you having stayed with me until this final moment. I am grateful for your open mind and spirit. I am grateful for your courage to face inconvenient truths. I'm grateful for being part of this growing community of seekers of truth. Subscribe now. Leave your profound comment. Leave your vital like. Watch the next video. And most importantly, integrate this information into your life. Investigate more, question more, trust your own inner knowing more, and live every day knowing that you are extraordinary, that you are part of an extraordinary cosmic story, and that your potential is absolutely limitless. The truth has been hidden for too long, but now you know, and knowledge is power. Use that power wisely.